Hey there. Sorry, guys. Right as I turned on my machine I usually use to do Zoom, it started doing an update and then blue screened. So I turned on an alternate laptop here.
Giraffe, G-I-R-A.
I can hear you, Franklin.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. So yeah, there's nothing more annoying than going to start a meeting and your computer blue screens. And for those of you that don't have an Apple, does that happen on Apple, by the way? Does it ever crash? Like that, we call it the blue screen of death on a PC. See if I can get this thing working and getting over it, because I'd rather use this other one. It's faster. So I just have to stitch these two videos together later. I am going to go ahead and have a class tomorrow. We need to do that to catch up, because of yesterday. I spent a lot of time. I was finishing up a COVID-19 project and then spent a lot of time yesterday working in the lab, trying to figure out the best way to get these virtual machines to where you guys could use them, and also change some of the assignments. So right now your assignments are basically just study chapters 1 through 5 and get ready for the test. So let's not worry about the assignments. Okay, it says I'm signed out. So do you guys still see me, by the way? Let's see.
Yes, we can see you, Professor.
Okay, so it's still running over here. What I'm going to do, I want to go ahead and run this over on this other machine. So it's going to stop probably. I don't know if I can be on both at the same time. We'll find out in just a minute here. Excuse me. Okay. So my two machines. Let me turn this one off. Or actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to record it over here, just in case.
It's an echo sound now. We can hear you like
I
an
know,
echo.
I'm going to fix that.
Okay.
No more echo, right? Or are you still hearing an echo?
We're still hearing an echo.
Okay, what about now? Did I fix it? Okay, so you see me on two different screens. Sorry about that. But this screen that I'm looking at you right now, this is the one that I've got attached to my external monitors that I want to share the screens from. So let me sit down. Okay. So I got the catalog built. So let me just go ahead and run through that real quick, just because I want people to try. I want you to try two things. First of all, I want you to try to see if you can get the VPN working, just because it's a good thing to try to learn how to use it. If you can't get the VPN working, that's okay. You should be able to access those virtual machines through what's called network address translation. We'll talk a little bit about network address translation today. Excuse me, because what I want to get into is the chapter 5, the network layer 3. We talked just a little bit about layer 2. We're missing a class from yesterday. I'm going to upload a video of an offline class that I will do later this evening to replace that class, so that you'll have the full picture of the data link layer. So did I show you guys, and did we talk about VPN already in this class? In other words, I think I either showed this class or 4397, my other class, how to attempt a VPN in. So I want you to try that first. My chat went down. Okay, so was anybody successful in getting VPN working into the EI lab.
No, I needed the password for it.
Okay, so here's what you do. And I went ahead when I tried to get Windows 10 catalogs built. I was able to get a Windows 10 virtual machine running on the VMware environment there in the lab, but what I couldn't get working and where the breakdown was is the software, the application that we're using to generate clones, automatically generate clones of all of these VMs once you get one built. That was breaking down. It wasn't properly cloning a Windows 10 virtual machine into Windows 10-1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I had to go through a lot of experimentation to figure out that wasn't working properly. I can't really get much done right now in terms of updating anything in the summer. So we're just going to use, and I'm going to have you guys use Windows 7 64-bit machines. It's going to be good enough for what we need to do, even though Windows 7 has been sunsetted and discontinued. You can still install 99% of the software that's out there. And all the software that we use, and the reason that I provide these virtual machines is so that you have a tool, you know, kind of like having another car to drive. I don't expect you to drive your own car, your laptop, especially if you don't have a Windows laptop. If you're using a Mac or if you don't have access to one, you can't install software. I wanted you to use these virtual machines. I don't want you to poison your own computers. So first of all, let me quickly just show you again the VPN. And I want you to try it again. And it may not have worked before when you guys tried it because it might have been a requirement to have the catalog built of virtual machines. It worked for my little test 000 account. I set up one with a student ID of all 7 zeros because that one was hard coded in there. So again, let me share my screen. Actually, let me fix one thing here. I've got 2 screens, but they're not duplicated. Let me change my display settings real quick so that I can have 2 screens at the same time. Extend these displays. Excuse me. I got to figure out which one. Let me identify. There's one and there's 2. Okay, hang on one second. And again, I'm sorry, this was all set up before this computer blue screened and it lost all the changes. One reason why I like to use and prefer Linux, the Linux operating system. I never have problems well, I should say never. I do sometimes have problems, but not as often. Put that one up there, apply, okay. Now I can share my screen number 2 here. Okay, you guys are seeing just screen 2, I think, right? I'm gonna be looking away from the chat window because my screen is kind of far away from where I've got this laptop perched here. So we're going to try this together again. So I'm on a Windows machine trying this. And let me temporarily move the bar. Move my bar over to this because I can't see it. It's all right. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to my network properties, my network and sharing center. I'll drag that over to the screen in just a second. It's this screen. Hopefully you guys know how to get to this screen in Windows, but if you can't, that's another issue. But I'm going to click set up a new connection or network. I've already got, let's see, on, no, not on this computer. So let's set up another connection. Let's see what I've got set up. I'm not sure if I have VPNs set up over here or not yet, but we'll go see. Actually, let's do that. Let's look at it. Oh yeah, I do. I have a bunch of them set up. I'm gonna delete all these and start over like it's fresh just to see if it works. Give me just a minute to get rid of these. Need those others. Virtual locks don't really need that one. But okay, so got rid of those. Connect to, no, not connect to the internet, connect to the workplace. Use my internet connection, internet address. This is where you need to type in the IP address because I don't have a name for this machine that you're accessing. 192.138.194.45. Let's just call it EI Lab. Remember my credentials, leave that on. Click create. Now don't do anything yet. Now go back over to your adapter settings. I clicked on changed adapter settings here, by the way. To get to that, I opened up Network and Sharing Center. And you can usually, to get to the screen, there's a little shortcut. Click on your start button and just start typing in the word network, and it'll pop up on the screen. One of the items in the menu will be Network and Sharing Center. Then click on change adapter settings because this essentially adds a network adapter called EI Lab. Let's go change the properties of it because the properties are not how they should be. Click on options here. Remember my credentials. Security, we want to change that. If you remember, I've already showed some of you this already. Change that from automatic to L2TP. And go to the advanced settings and then use the pre-shared key. That's where I have given you guys all the same key of disk 2020. So disk 2020, write that down or type that down. Or try this. You can try this while you're talking to me. This is not going to kill your Zoom connection. It should not kill your Zoom connection. Make that encryption optional. And I think that's all you have to do to change on that connection setting. And let's double click on it. Excuse me, single click and click connect on it. Let's see if we can get it connecting. That opens this other window over here. Click on EI Lab. I'm going to click connect. And for username and password, and this is where it wasn't working before, but it should work now. You should be able to use your student ID. So for those of you that are trying it right now, you can send me a chat message or say something if it does work for you. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Password. The password, I made it a generic password for everybody for right now, and you will be prompted to change it. So let me open up WordPad real quick here so I can type these things down where you can see them. So the generic password, and this is going back to how I used to do it. I was trying to change that so that we weren't using generic passwords and we weren't using Windows 7 anymore, but it's just easier to go with what I know works. We don't have time in the summer as I figure it out. 2 or 3 days of farting around, and you guys are getting behind, and I apologize for that. So let's just move on with what we've got. So use VMJ, stands for Virtual Machine Jake, US3R exclamation point. And keep in mind that most everything that I'm telling you right now is as it exists in the notes right now on connecting to your EI Lab computer. The only thing that's not in the existing notes is trying to do this VPN part. But that password is the correct default password for the EI Lab, and then the PSK for the VPN is disk 2020. Okay, so keep those two things in mind. So let's try that VMJUS3R exclamation point. I'm going to click OK. It should not take more than 30 seconds to do this, and it should pop up. Completion. So completing the connection. It's actually probably connected now. It says connecting. Let's do it. Now, what it will probably do on yours, if you're trying this right now, you're probably going to get a pop-up window asking you to change your password, because I set up the catalogs. When I set up student accounts, I always make it so you have to change your password in the beginning. So if it's working for you, see, mine just says connected, but what you should get is a pop-up. Please change your password. Enter the old password, the VMJUS3R, and then enter some new password that follows Microsoft's requirements for passwords, which are some amount of uppercase letters plus some amount of lowercase letters plus at least one number. And then I believe you have to use a special character. On this version of Windows, you might not have to, but usually I stick an exclamation point on the end to satisfy that. So make that a unique password, memorize that, type it down. What's this capture? Somebody sending me a screen capture?
Yeah, I'm getting some sort of error on there.
Let me take a look here. It's trying to download it to my Windows System 32 folder. That's weird. Hang on one second, Marty. Downloads. Let me look at your screen capture here. See what and I'll show people if they want. Can I share it, by the way?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Good. I got to start getting people to use this screen capture more often now.
Yeah.
Where is it? Oh gosh, my downloads folder is so full. I have to clean that out. Clean that sucker out so I can see what you're sending me. Here it is.
Yeah, it says, please contact the administrator of the RAS server and notify them of this error. Yeah.
Is not recognized, or the selected authentication protocol is not permitted on their remote access server. Okay. Is anybody else getting that same thing? I might need to change one other thing for you. I might need to add users to the VPN. Actually, if you bear with me for 1 minute, let me see if I can do that really quickly, and you guys can watch what I'm doing. And we'll use it as a learning exercise. I won't spend more than a couple minutes, because I don't want to get bogged down in this, but I think I know why this is occurring. It's all about permissions. This is a good thing. This means that you did make the connection, but the authentication was not allowed, or the VPN service was not allowed. So let me, excuse me, I'm going to remote view into the domain controller, which I think is our issue here. Just real quick. I'm going to use my little remote desktop. No, restore pages, no, not after that blue screen. There's the domain controller there. I believe I added a special group called VPN users, which I did not put the student accounts into because I recreated them all. I deleted them and recreated them all, and I'm sure that's why I forgot. Excuse me. So there's all the usernames, by the way. Yeah, I'll have to delete that off the video later. I don't want people to see that. Go look at groups here. Yeah, VPN authorized users. I'm sure that's what's going on. And there's, yeah, I need to add everybody to that. So let me scroll. Let me drag this off the screen so you guys can't see what I don't want people to see other people's student IDs. Although I think that that's probably easy for people to get. I don't want to do that. Give me 1 sec. And then I want you to try it again as soon as I tell you. So yeah, are you here, by the way, in the class? I think you're the only person whose account starts with a 0. figured that out when I was adding these student accounts. I forgot to zero fill on something. Excuse me. Apply. Okay, so now everybody is in that list of VPN authorized users. Let's try it again and let's see if that works. I also set up an additional user that I'm going to try again real quick too. Let me see if I can find me. Yeah, I set up 00001. Okay, so I'm going to try it again myself with this other user ID I set up. There's that. For MacBook, you have to put in an account name. That's probably just the name of what it's called. But the authentication, the items that you need, that I know that you need are the user ID and password is your student ID. And then the password, as if it's a domain password, maybe that's account name. And then the pre-shared key or PSK. So let's try it again one more time. I'm going to create a network connection. And now I'm going to just redo this one. I'm going to turn off remember my credentials because I want it to ask me again for the user ID and password. And I'm going to, I think I'm connected. Yeah, I'm going to disconnect. I'm going to connect again. So my user ID, this is, again, I'm not sure on the app, but as soon as we figure it out, Soraya, oh, that's good that you're getting an error though, a different error. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. No. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And don't worry about domain. Let's see what I'm getting. Sorry, I forgot to turn off my phone. I don't think about it when I'm home here. I only think about it when I'm walking into class. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I need to reset my password. Completing the connection. What was your error, Soraya? Do you know how to do a screen capture? Oh, you did one here? Let me take a look.
Yeah,
I see it. Let me see if I can download it and take a look.
Okay.
Is this on an Apple or a PC?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Is this, are you on an Apple or a PC?
PC.
Okay, good. Let's take a look at yours and see if we can figure out what's different about it. And then if we can't figure this out in the next 2 minutes, I just want to abandon it. We'll figure it out. And then by fall of 2020, we'll be VPN and remote access experts. I'm sorry that this is not smoother than it is now, but certain things that I thought would work okay, I realized, oh, we can't do it that way because of, you know, whatever. Attempt failed because the security layer encountered a processing error during initial negotiations with the remote computer. So that's usually something to do with when I have seen that happen. Excuse me. That usually has something to do with the advanced settings of L2TP. So make sure that you've got L2TP with IPsec with pre-shared key, not with certificate. That's the default. Make sure it's that, okay? And then it should allow you to enter that pre-shared key of disk 2020. And then the username and password, you can leave those out until you actually click the login. Did it ask you for a username and password, Shreya?
Yeah, it does ask for a password. So I'm trying to go back and
Okay, yeah, double check those settings like I just showed you. If you're, hopefully you're able to find those.
okay.
Otherwise, if you can't fix it, let's just get on with the class. And what I'll do is, well, actually, before getting on with the class, let me show you the other thing that you can do that probably won't work. I literally just tested this before the class. So assuming the VPN's not working, let's see if we can get network address translation working. This doesn't require very much on your part. The only thing that you need to do, well, actually, there's two things you need to download. And again, these were in my notes, is first of all, you need to have Chrome Remote running. Or not Chrome Remote, but just Chrome running. So let me open a Chrome window here. And you need to have installed this thing called IE-Tab, which is in the Google plug. You can search for underneath Chrome, you can Google for plugins in IE-Tab. That thing here, install IE-Tab. And once IE-Tab is installed, then you get this little icon up at the top in Chrome, and it gives you this Internet Explorer looking window that you can type something in. So what you want to type in there is http:// You do have to type all that in. .192.138.194.45. Same thing that we were typing in when we were setting up the VPN connection. Hang on, let me close that. And then on the end of it, you want to go to :9080. Add that port number on the end, :9080. You should get this screen here. Now, you probably, and this should work for everybody right now, even if you're just using Chrome without IE-Tab, you should get this screen. You may see a green button there that says install the Citrix receiver. Don't click that green button. The Citrix receiver version that is on the server doesn't seem to be compatible. So here's the next thing I need to show you. And I'll put this on the WordPad document here. So if the VPN doesn't work, or even if you do get your VPN working, I want you to try both of these ways. So Chrome plus IE-Tab plugin. Get that done first, install. That's hopefully a no-brainer to install a plugin. And then try to go to http://192.138.194.45:9080. Most of you are probably not used to typing in a colon and a port number, which we'll talk about some today. It should present you with this screen, but before you try to log in, when you get this login screen here, we need to also do one other thing, and that is go download Citrix Receiver 4.11. That's an older version of the Citrix Receiver, so just go Google for that. Citrix Receiver 4.11. I'm just going to open up another Chrome window right here and look for Citrix Receiver 4.11. There it is right there. Click on that. And I guess I should assume that some people have Apple. I need to make sure. Yep, looks like there's a receiver Mac version, which is the version's a little bit different, but the date's right. What we're looking for is a receiver version that is in around April or May of 2018. So the Windows version Excuse me. I sneeze every class, don't I? They're on February 26th, so the Windows version came out a little bit before the Mac version, which is usually the case. Excuse me. Let's download this and install it. It's a quick little install. It's a small program, not very big at all. This is basically like the Chrome Remote Desktop, the team viewer. I go to my PC, but it's the client side, so it's a very small program which is installed. We're not installing a server. Oh, excuse me, that was in the background. I didn't see this. Start. License agreement. I accept. Install. It's putting all this over on my main screen. I'm having to drag it over. That's why you're not seeing all of this immediately. So when you're Googling, search for download Citrix Receiver 4.11, but if you're using a Mac, put Mac OS on the end of that. And that will take you to that Citrix Receiver 12 point something. You're looking for version around Feb to May of 2018. The newer versions, they claim, and this is what I was playing with all last night, they claim that newer version was download compatible, but it didn't seem to be, didn't seem to work. Let me, I need to disconnect from the VPN. I might still be connected, so I don't want to be connected through the VPN on purpose. Because we're trying to see if this works without that. All right, I'm disconnected from it, so I'm just like a normal person now, no VPN going on. Not sure why that's taking a long time. I guess I'm a liar. I don't know why it's saying initializing forever. Might have something to do with Zoom running at the same time. But once that's finished, I want to make sure it's not anywhere else. There's no other windows asking me to press this to continue. No, I don't see anything. Once that's done, there it goes, finally started. Come back to this page, refresh it, and then you should see it looking more like this, where it's not asking you. I've already installed it, but I'm installing it again. It should not ask you to skip the log on or install some software. So that's how you know you've installed Citrix Receiver 4.11, the proper version. So let that finish. In the meantime, I'm also going to go over to log into this in preparation for talking about layer 3 today. In case we get bogged down on that. Bogged down on this game. Content. I might stop the PowerPoint if I notice this is finished. I'm going to drag this off the screen and watch it on a different screen for right now. And when it's done, I'll come back to it. Okay, I have not, thanks for pointing that out. I've not uploaded. I started to make a video. It's in 2 or 3 pieces for the physical layer. I have not made the remainder of the data link layer, which is a video that, or a class that we would have had yesterday. So that's not up there either. I need to do that as well. So I'm going to go right into chapter 5 here. And don't feel bad if you're like, well, wait a minute, I don't know enough about chapter 3 and chapter 4 yet. These chapters all stand alone on themselves. In other words, we could have skipped to chapter 5 first after chapter 1, then gone back to chapter 4 and then chapter 3. So these all stand alone. So chapter 5 is layer 3. Excuse me, bear with me a sec here. Yeah, that's taking a long time to install. There may be some issue, although I've never run into any before, but I haven't really used Zoom that much. There may be some issue with installing certain pieces of software while you're running Zoom, because that is going god awful slow. This should not. Is anybody else trying this? Well, I'd like somebody else to try this with a Windows PC, installing the receiver while we're having a Zoom meeting. It was slower. Yeah, it's weird. It should not be that slow. Now, I'm using a pretty fast laptop here too. Oh, there, it suddenly started speeding up. I bet, you know what I bet it is? I bet it has a lot to do with the .NET framework. It probably needs 3.0 or 3.5 or something that you might not have. In other words, it's relying on other libraries which may or may not be installed in your computers. This is what a lot of, actually it's almost done, so let's see, let's let it finish. What a lot of programmers do and a lot of companies do that write apps is they rely on libraries for some of their application functions. In other words, they're not going to rewrite routines to do date checking and range checking and drawing certain types of icons and things on the screen. They're going to use libraries. And so a lot of code that you download, it first checks to see if you have any of these libraries installed, which you do a lot, have a lot of them. But if you don't have certain libraries like the .NET framework, it has to go out and download those. So that's probably what was going on in the background, why the Citrix receiver was taking so long, because in the background it was going to Microsoft.com and downloading a bunch of framework code, 99% of which we probably don't need or use for this program. Okay. Don't worry about adding account. When it finishes, just click finish. Now that it's installed, that's like our middleware program there. That's what we had to install. So now go back to this. I'm going to cut all that out, just like I typed it fresh. Go there, log in. Let's log in with the username and password 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now I'm gonna log into the one that I know works. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Information point. Domain eilab.bauer.uh.edu. This part should look just like what I've got in the notes, by the way. Log on. No, I don't remember that password. You can tell it to remember the password if you want on yours. I got the blue screen with the push button. That's good. Let's see, what's it asking for? Let's see. Oh, I think I accidentally started it twice. Oh, that's okay. I didn't see it. I'm not on my main computer at the moment, but I've downloaded Citrix before. I was able to install on a Mac. It's asking for a work email or server address provided by the IT department. I don't think you need that just to install that old version. We're just installing it and then going away. Have I updated the calendar? No, I don't. I'd like you to, Armand, try the VPN. If it doesn't work, use the NAT version instead. And this did work earlier, a few minutes ago before I started the Zoom meeting. That's right about when I got the blue screen of death, by the way, so I may lose everybody in about 10 seconds here. Hopefully not, but we will see. I think it's going to work just fine. I think the reason it's going really slow is because, as I said before, the first time you do this, the computer or the virtual machine is off and it's booting it up. And if more than one of you is trying this right now, it's booting up several machines. In fact, let's go see. I can see if anybody's been successful by remote viewing. Oh, I think I heard something already. Failed. Oh, okay. Let's try it again. Try that one more time. I know it worked earlier. If I go look at vCenter. Actually, not that one. That's the one I had them all opened on. Already got saved. Oh. Okay, I can see some coming on here. In the student view, so some of you are getting close. Some of you are trying. So I'll monitor that, but in the meantime, after class, if you're not able to get this working, send me an email, or if you are able to get it working. Let me know, okay? All right, you guys still seeing me okay? I got hit a weird error on the screen, but I don't think it was a Zoom error. The password for the Citrix login. The Citrix login is going to be your student ID. And the password is that up here, that VMJUS3R, same thing that it is up here. And then the domain, eilab.bauer.uh.edu. That's what you should be typing in. Unknown client. All right. Well, I'll have to try it later. I'll mess with it later. I know it was working. I got it to work with that receiver version 4.11. One way or the other, I'll get it working, or if I can't get it working, I will just manually assign. I'll do that over the weekend, manually assign everybody to a computer, and I will manually set up some remote viewing program that's more generic, like TeamViewer, and just email everybody individually. Here's your TeamViewer number and a generic password, and then you can change it from there. I don't have too many students that I can't do that. Just obviously, I want to try to do this the most automatic way. Otherwise, it's not very good network management. Okay, chapter 5. Chapter 5 is all about the network layer. This one, some of you probably do understand. Between this one and the data link layer, these are some of the most important layers with respect to management, with respect to the more technical side of the management, because this is where people really run into trouble. Not so much the applications, although applications can get you into trouble as well. But this is where we can stop bad guys from getting into your network, and where we can stop program code from getting on your computer and doing bad things on your networks. So we're going to talk about layer 3 and layer 4 at the same time. They're very related to each other. So I know I mentioned just layer 3, but we'll talk about layer 3 and 4. So let me mention layer 3 first, since we're kind of going in order. We had started talking about data link layer, weren't quite finished. Again, I need to upload a video for that. The network layer, layer 3 right here, it's responsible for addressing and routing of messages. At this layer, the messages are called packets. Now, if I were to ask you to describe to me on a test, what is layer 3 responsible for? If all that you wrote is layer 3 is responsible for addressing and routing, you're going to get 50% credit for that answer. You need to tell me more specifically what addressing and routing is, and we should get to that today in just a few minutes here. The transport layer, layer 4, is in the internet model, links the application and network layers together. How it differs is that the transport layer uses port numbers. The IP layer uses IP addresses, like the 192.168.1. whatever you might have right now in your computer, whereas the transport layer uses port numbers 0 to 65535. Each one of those port numbers is related to a particular application. Okay, so for example, the TCP port number 80 is typically used for web traffic. The TCP port number 25 is used for email. TCP port number 21 is used for transferring files back and forth. These numbers are very low numbers, and the way these numbers are assigned or were assigned, they get assigned by organizations like ISO or the IEEE or ANSI, is somebody dreams up a protocol, says, hey, this is how we believe two computers should communicate with a particular type of application. We want to apply for a particular port number and make that an official port number that everybody adheres to on the internet. So FTP, File Transfer Protocol, that's been around a long time because it was the 21st ratified protocol that's public and generally available on the internet. SMTP, specifically for email. The actual name of the protocol is SMTP, by the way. And this protocol is actually called HTTP. So port 80. So the World Wide Web has been around a while. We're up now into the thousands of port numbers. So if you write a game, for example, and you're the Fortnite server guys, or you're Minecraft, you're probably using some port. And the good thing about that for most end users is you don't need to know what port number it is. It's like 32.7 something. It's a much higher number, 32768. You typically need to know. Most end users don't need to know at all what these port numbers are, but network managers do, because sometimes we need to try to block or filter those port numbers so that we can control traffic. This is where we do most of our traffic control, is right here between these two layers. We cannot do our traffic control as easily at the physical layer. We try, and the physical layer is the best place to do traffic control. If you don't want people on your network, don't put a wireless network in. Don't give them physical access. But if we have a network that we want other people to use, we have to have some sort of access, physical access to it. So we load all this other stuff on top of it, but we don't want just anybody in the world to come in the door. So our network and transport layers are working kind of like our doormen. The door's open, but there's a big Samoan dude standing at the front door saying, oh, wait a minute, who are you? Show me your ID, give me $20, whatever it is, whatever the rule is, whatever the requirement is to get traffic in the door. And then they also work, firewalls is what I'm talking about. Firewalls work with the transport network layer with outgoing traffic optionally as well. They can prevent things from going out the door if they want to. So think about firewalls as your doorman that are operating with IP addresses and port numbers. Okay, the transport layer, let's talk about that a little bit more. So it links everything together in the application layer with a specific port number, both a source and destination port number. It's responsible for segmenting and reassembling traffic. Now keep this in mind, all the traffic that comes out of the application layer in the form of messages. It's all variable length messages, a bunch of different sizes. And many times we need to break those messages down into smaller pieces to put them on the road. Let's say, for example, you've got a party and there's 500 people at your party and you're saying, okay, we're all gonna go 2 miles away to a movie theater and watch the premiere of my new movie. So you either have to rent a bus that carries 200 people, which doesn't exist, or you got to get 10 limos and to start filing people out the door and putting them into one of these 10 limos. So think of the transport layer as the limos coming to pick up your party, your application here. Everybody can't fit in one. And these limousines or these transport layer, at this point we call them segments. They are a specified maximum length. The transport layer segments, by default, are never over 1,460 bytes. So keep that in mind. TCP segments, not packets, but TCP segments are never more than 1,460 bytes. They could be smaller. So think about this think about it as a limo with 1,460 seats in it, or a bus, if you will. With 1,460 seats, a byte is one character on the keyboard. So the transport layer is responsible for not only breaking up these messages into smaller pieces, it's also responsible for putting them all back together. It's also responsible for the session management. That is when you run an application layer program like Chrome to go view a web page. The transport layer is responsible for creating the connection and establishing when the connection starts and how long the connection should stay active. Yes, there's some stuff going on in the application layer, but there's transport layer tunnels, which are open between the sender and the receiver of the data. And those are all managed by the transport layer in terms of what tunnels or what channels, if you will, are open, how long they've been open, whether or not I should be listening or receiving traffic. In other words, the session management is kind of like the limo driver using a radio to communicate with somebody at the other side going, okay, how many people do you have there? Are they waiting for me? Do I need to come pick them up now? So there's kind of like, there's a communication going on. At some point, the limo driver says, okay, well, I'm taking a lunch break now, so I'm no longer available. He drives away and you've got to get another limo driver. So session management. And responsible finally for the end-to-end delivery of the messages. The application layer is not the thing that's really responsible for the delivery of the messages. So your limo driver, whatever limo you ended up in, he's the one responsible for getting you from the party to the movie theater and then back again, or vice versa. Protocols. A protocol, as I mentioned before, is a specialized language, a little beyond the language. The protocol suite, and I'm going to make that clear, that TCP/IP is not a protocol, it's a combination, or a protocol suite. Protocol suite. Not sweet like sugar, but sweet like you're working in an office and there's multiple offices in here. It's actually 2 layers of protocol. It includes transport layer protocol that we call TCP, transmission control protocol, and a network layer protocol, IP. So the TCP part is layer 4 and the IP part is layer 3. We refer to this whole protocol as a protocol suite known as TCP/IP. Okay, keep TCP/IP in mind. It is the dominant network protocol, regardless of whether you're on a LAN or a backbone network or a WAN or a wireless network It's the thing that sits on top of Ethernet. So you've got a physical connection down at the bottom, like Wi-Fi, for example, or Cat5, if you're on a wired connection. Then you've got on the top of that, at the data link layer, you've got Ethernet, or 802.11, which is really a protocol suite as well. Then on top of that, at layer 3 here, you have TCP/IP at layer 3 and 4. This is where your IP addresses come in and your port numbers come in. And sitting on top of that is all of your application layer programs, like your web browsers, your web servers, your email programs. So the dominant, unlike the application layer where there's many, many different protocols, there's really only one well-known protocol suite at these two layers. It's called TCP/IP. There used to be more. There was SNA with SDLC, and there was IP with IPX, but they're all gone because this protocol, like Ethernet, was developed as an open source protocol, and anybody that wanted to write code or develop networking hardware that would pass network traffic could simply ask these two guys, Vinton Cerf and Bob Kahn, who developed it way back in 1974, IP version 1. Hey, can we have the specifications to that networking protocol you guys are working on? They say, sure, here it is. I'd email it to you, or mail it to you if there was no email. So originally it was just layer 3, and we later separated the TCP part from the IP part. So we didn't used to have a layer 4. It was 1, 2, 3, and then the application layer was layer 4. It went 1, 2, 3, 5. So originally, when I started teaching this class, it was a 4-layer class. Most common protocol of the internet and in local area networks, backbones, and WANs. You don't need to know who Vinton Cerf and Bob Kahn are, but you could go Google them and look them up. I think they're both alive. I think they're both, they're pretty popular people, pretty smart guys. The Transmission Control Protocol, TCP. You do need to know what that stands for. Transmission Control Protocol, TCP. Most common transport layer protocol. The protocol data unit, as I mentioned earlier, is called a segment. At the IP layer, it's called a packet. Here we call it a segment, and that's because it's responsible for segmentation. It's breaking up your messages into little pieces. It's used for what's called, and that should be in quotes, reliable communication or reliable transmission of data. Now, that doesn't mean an error-free transmission. When we use that term reliable, and I want to point that out now because it'll come up in future learnings, what reliable means at layer 4 is that it's a connection-oriented method of communication. In other words, your application layer program establishes a connection with an application layer server program, like an email server, for example. A session is started by the transport layer. All of the segments, and it is important, I think you would agree, for all of the segments of an email from 1 to whatever, 1 to 1,000, for example, to arrive in order and that none are missing from the communication. That's what I mean by a reliable communication. If one packet or one segment is lost, your email is not readable, or 90% of it might be readable, and you get down near the bottom and there's a bunch of garbage or there's a big missing piece. In other words, reliable or connection-oriented transmission is required when the message that's being sent is required to be 100% accurate and correct, and all the pieces get there. Now, you might think to yourself, well, isn't that important for all communications? Isn't it important for all protocols to send every single bit of data from application to application? And I can think of a couple of really good examples and reasons why that's not necessarily the case with all protocols. We're using one of them right now. How important is it for you as a viewer of this Zoom meeting to get every single bit of frame, and I'm talking about video frame and audio signal that I'm sending. If you miss a half of one word that I'm saying, you can probably figure out what I'm talking about. You might stop and say, hey, I didn't hear that because of some whatever reason, I'll repeat it. But for the most part, I'm sending out a certain number of frames per second from my Zoom meeting. I don't know what it is. I didn't write Zooms. Probably, it looks like about 20 frames per second. I'm actually on two different computers here. I'm on this computer that I'm recording and controlling the Zoom meeting, and then I was on my other emergency backup laptop, and it logged me out of that. I'm just a participant at that point. That computer is probably not receiving every single frame of video that I'm sending out, and it's probably not receiving all of the audio, but that's okay. That is an unreliable communication or connection. Now, the book doesn't talk much about this. Okay, so that's why I'm pointing this out now, and this is an important concept to understand. Connectionless is probably the most connectionless types of communication are probably the most used internet protocols, and most of the traffic is connectionless on the internet now. It's not connection oriented. And that's because most of our internet traffic now is video and audio. People are downloading movies or watching TV. Does anybody in here still watch a real TV anymore, by the way? You have a TV in a room with rabbit ears on it or cable? Does anybody still have and pay an ungodly amount for cable TV, or worse yet, satellite? Does anybody still have satellite in their home? Yes to cable? Okay, so I'm curious, Andrew, why do you still have cable? Are you not paying for it? Maybe your parents are paying for it, and that might be presumptuous for me to say that. I know some of you are close to my age, but most of you are not. Most of you are, yes, your parents are paying for it. Okay, so I hope it was okay. I was presumptuous there, Andrew. So they're probably paying for it because it's a legacy service for them. Or I actually do have rabbit ears on a couple of my TVs. And that's because you can get free services. A lot of stuff that the cable TV companies charge you is free or not available on cable, but you can get it over the air or OTA. Anyway, my point is that connectionless, AKA unreliable communications, is actually using a protocol typically called UDP. That's a transport layer protocol, which is not TCP. It's UDP. It stands for User Datagram Protocol, and that's when you don't know, and you want to use that kind of communication when you don't know where the end is. Somebody wants to start a communication. I want to start watching The Mandalorian on the Disney Channel, but I might need to just turn it off and go somewhere in a little while. So it's not important if I get all of it. Nor does the other end need to care. As long as I've logged into Netflix or Disney Channel or whatever, and I've described who I am, and I tell them, hey, I want to start watching The Mandalorian or old episodes of Friends or whatever it is, that data just starts streaming down to me, down to my laptop. It's not required for the sending computer to acknowledge that it sent you all of those frames. So that does two things. First of all, it allows me to kind of control the situation. I'll just turn my computer off when I'm done, or I'll turn the TV off, basically, the IPTV. I'll turn it off when I'm done. The other end will eventually notice, oh, he's not receiving any more frames. I guess I'll just log him out. But it's based on a timeout, not based on me responding. Yes, I got frame 1, send frame 2. Yes, I got frame 2, send frame 3. I'm talking about video frames. If you use TCP for communicating video and audio, our communication would be so freaking slow, especially if it's a true satellite communication where you're watching satellite TV on a laptop sitting in the middle of the desert in Australia or something, which a lot of people do. The back and forth to acknowledge every packet or every segment received would be way too slow. So you set up a TCP connection on one TCP port number, like in the case of voice over IP. And I do want you guys to look this up. You can do this later, but VoIP. It's probably the most commonly used communication protocol for real-time communication. I mentioned in the last class that surfing the web, that's pseudo-conversational or not real-time. It seems to be real-time, but it's VoIP, voice over IP. We're communicating in a Zoom meeting here, and this is basically the same thing as that. This is VoIP, it's just VoIP and video. It's VoIP, voice and video over IP. VoIP as an application, it's not a protocol, VoIP is an application, or it's a concept. It uses two very common protocols, and I want you guys to look this up. It uses something called SIP, which stands for Session Initiation Protocol, and it also uses something called RTP. Is it RDP or RTP? RTP, RTP. I get confused with another one. SIP and RTP. Both of those are protocols which are used in the VoIP concept of transmitting messages. SIP is a transport layer protocol. So it's TCP. It's the most common port number. It can be run on multiple port numbers, but the standard SIP port number happens to be 5060. Okay? In other words, if I'm running a SIP compliant telephone, which is really just a specialized computer that looks like a phone, it's communicating with a server somewhere, and you put in a server address, sip.uh.edu, for example, but you don't use port 80, it's not web traffic, you use port 5060. If you're not given a port number, that's what your SIP program assumes, that it's port 5060. RTP, on the other hand, that's used for the actual audio and video streams. That's usually some random port number between 10,000 to 20,000. There are certain ranges of port numbers, all the way up to 65536, by the way. 65536. That are used for transport layer communications. Does anybody know why that number is significant, by the way? Not to go down too many rabbit holes there, but what is significant about the number 65536? Anybody know? There is a significance to it. That happens to equal 2 to the 16th power. And for purposes of exam 2, not exam 1, when we start doing some subnetting, you will be responsible for knowing up through not 2 to the 16th, but 2 to the 8th power. But just know that 2 to the 16th power is 65,536. You can ask Google if you want. I'll wait. Or you can do it in your head. 248, 1632, 64. Just double it every time. So at some point when Bob Cotton and Surf were developing, or the people that developed the current TCP protocol version were developing, and they said, let's go with 65536. There's that many protocols that we can come up with. Now, I bet you in about 10 years from now, we're going to have the same crisis that we're having right now, and that is we're running out of IP version 4 addresses. So now IP version 6 is coming online, and everybody's, or at least all the network managers, are languishing over, oh God, now we've got to learn a brand new numbering scheme. It's kind of like going from a 10-digit telephone number to a 28-digit telephone number. It's a big pain in the ass. Everybody can remember a 10-digit number fairly easily. 281-555, 7171, whatever your number is, but a 28-digit number, and worse off, that number can have letters in it. So if you're trying to give somebody your telephone number and it was an IP version 6 world, you'd be telling them, okay, my telephone number is FE00:321E, dot 1542. There'd be no way you can remember 28 digits, which include A through F. Okay, so that's part of IP version 6. So my point is what I want you to look up is that VoIP uses two protocols. The SIP is to simply set up the telephone call. I dial somebody from my VoIP phone, and a lot of you are using VoIP phones, and you just don't realize it. Your cell phone is a VoIP phone. It's not really a phone. It's just a specialized computer. It's a PDA. It's a little tiny computer in your pocket, whether it's an iPhone or, and I'm sure you guys all realize that, right? Because you can do a bunch more shit with it than just talk. I had one of the original bag phones, which was just a phone, but now all phones are just specialized computers with a phone application on them. So they set up the call. You call somebody, whatever their number is, that is setting up the session. Starts a timer. Hey, I've been on this call for 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, whatever it is. But your actual audio and video is going over that protocol RTP on some random port numbers, maybe multiple port numbers. And the reason they do that is because this part of it can be unreliable. If you drop a few packets, like right now as you're, and I know this happens to a lot of you when you're speaking in a conversation on a cell phone, it is very likely that you are going to lose some packets in some segments, but that's okay with most audio and video, isn't it? If you lose 1/10 of a second of audio, your brain can't even really know. Our brain can't notice anything faster than a 1/20th of a second of movement. Did you know that? It's actually about 1/24th of a second. What's significant about 1/24th of a second? Does anybody know what that answer is? Or I should say 24 FPS. What the heck is 24 FPS? What am I talking about there, guys?
Frames per second?
Yeah, in terms of video, 24 frames per second. In other words, video. The thing that you're watching right now, the Zoom video or anything that you watch on TV, it's not really video. It's not real motion. Real motion is, you're picking it up with your eyeballs and something's actually moving. It's just 24 still pictures per second, all slightly different from each other. It's just all still pictures. You're receiving one still picture and then 1/24th of a second, you're receiving another still picture, which is slightly different. That's what causes the motion. Our brains perceive that as motion. So we don't perceive much of a drop in terms of receiving data anywhere close to 24 frames per second. If it gets to be like 5 to 10 frames per second, yeah, there's a little choppiness. But my point is, connectionless works really well for audio and video emulation. So that's why you see a lot of, and that's where a lot of the heavy lifting's done. That's where most of the data lives. You log into Netflix or whatever using this protocol, or I shouldn't say that protocol, using TCP. But then all the video that's streaming down to you is coming in on some random UDP ports. It's connectionless. Okay. I know I spent a lot of time on that, but that's important concepts that I think are important upfront to learn. It'll open your mind and open your eyes to realizing just exactly how communication works between two computers or two nodes on a network. And there's really only two methods of communication at this layer: TCP and UDP. It's the only two real protocols. Yes, there's a couple more, but they're control protocols like ping, for example, and DHCP and stuff like that. But anyway, so the transmission control protocol adds 20 to 24 bytes of overhead. And this is why that frame size, that TCP application segment can't be bigger than 1460, and you'll understand why in a minute. So 20 to 24 bytes of overhead. I'm not going to ask you to memorize the actual layout of a segment, but this gray box here in the rightmost corner, that's whatever you typed on your keyboard. That's whatever chunk of video you're receiving at the time is there. All of this other stuff, the transport layer sticks in there in order to transmit the message. In other words, this is the letter that you wrote. If we're using an analogy of you writing a letter to somebody, this is the letter that you wrote, and all this other junk is the envelope, the stamp, the from and the to address on the outside of the letter. It's all the stuff that's required to get your content. Dear Dad, I'm sorry I haven't written you in a long time. Hopefully you guys are still writing actual letters, but maybe not. That's what we call the user data. Overhead is added at every layer. So there's 20 to 24 bytes. The reason that it's 20 to 24 is because there is some optional information that might be sent, like quality of service and further identifying what kind of segment this is. Is it a video segment? Is it an audio segment? So I already talked about UDP. There's TCP and there's UDP. User Datagram Protocol, it's connectionless. It operates also at the transport layer. It's also called a segment, but it is used where you don't need to acknowledge every single segment that you receive. And you will notice that the overhead is smaller. Here's our same user data, but it's only 4 to 8 bytes of overhead. So by definition, this makes the communication go faster. And in the case of video and audio, where there's a lot of communication going on, because we do need to be receiving as humans, we need to get at least 20 frames per second of video to not look too choppy. Like right now, if I move my head around a lot, it's starting to get a little blurry, a little choppy, because you're probably only getting about 10 to 15 frames per second. On my laptop, I see it nice and smooth, but on my other laptop here, I'm pretty choppy. So the point is, the smaller the amount of overhead, if I have to add 24 bytes per segment, that's a lot of extra overhead versus 8 bytes per segment. It's like, you know how I talked about that analogy of getting in a limo and driving somewhere? If you need to get from point A to point B really fast, you know, you were at the party and oh my God, somebody cut their hand on a wine glass. I need to get them to the hospital. Quick, somebody go around and get the limo. No, don't get the limo. That guy's drives slow and it's big and it's slow. Just come get in my Corvette and I'll drive it directly to the hospital right now. So in other words, TCP versus UDP is using the right protocol for the urgency of the traffic. How important is it for that traffic to get there? Excuse me, get there in a timely manner. It is important for the traffic to get there, but you know, I'm not a professional driver, so I might crash on my Corvette. Not that I have a Corvette, but I have a, never mind. Let's pretend I have a fast car. I'm not a professional car driver. And if I'm in a hurry and I just need to get you to the hospital, I'm going to ignore rules and things like that. And I might crash and kill us both. Okay, so I'm UDP at that point. But if you want to ensure getting to the hospital, what's the safest way to get to the hospital if you've hurt yourself? Hire some professionals, use an ambulance. But you might die before the ambulance gets there, and they're gonna pseudo follow rules. Although they do get to run red lights and things. Most of the time, at least in this country, they don't really do anything until they get you to the hospital. They stabilize you. In Europe, by the way, they try to fix you first before they transport you to the hospital. So anyway, here's how we're doing on time. We're okay on time. Here's layer 3, the network layer protocol. So we're just keep in mind, layer 4 is all port numbers, 0 to 65535. I know I mentioned 65536, but we actually start counting at 0. In the networking world, we're like the Mayans. We all start counting at 0. So if you were a computer and you were talking to another computer and one of them said, hey, count to 10, the other computer goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so keep that in mind. Computers use and start counting at the number 0, whether it's binary or decimal or whatever. IP version 4, that's the dominant network protocol. This is where your 192.168. whatever come in. It's the most common version of IP. It's a 32-bit address, or 2 to the 32nd power, which I'm not going to ask you to memorize that, but it's approximately 4.29 billion addresses. So this is kind of like a 32-digit long telephone number. The only 2 digits are 1 and 0. I bet you didn't know that. Your IP address is really just made up of a bunch of 1s and 0s. Now, we as humans, we don't like to read just 1s and 0s. It'd be very difficult to communicate and take a lot longer. We're not computers. We use the analog world. So we convert, for purposes of network managers and humans typing in numbers, we convert it to a decimal number, which works out to 4 octets, the maximum, and we also like to split it up into pieces. So in IP version 4, we typically, that's the notation that we use, IPv4. The lowest number in decimal, lowest IP address that your computer might have 0.0.0.0. We don't use that number for anybody because that's like a starting number, all the way through 255.255.255.255. That's the highest possible number, okay? The dots are there simply for readability. Again, the computer is just seeing a 32-bit number that looks something like this. That could be your IP address. Just pretend there's 32 ones and zeros there. I'm not going to bother to count those out. That gets converted into decimal. And by the way, for exam 2, you are going to be converting a lot of binary to decimal. Sorry about that, but that's how that works. So right now, if you looked up your IP address, it's probably 10.1.10. something, or it might be 192.168.8.1. something, but it's never going to be higher than 255. There's an old movie with Sandra Bullock in it called The Net, which is like the first internet hacker espionage movie, and she was typing in, and this is how network managers knew it was fake, because she was typing in IP addresses in a web browser like 365.288. Blah, blah, you know, stupid crap like that, you know, because Hollywood's full of a bunch of idiots and they didn't bother to look any of this up. And it's kind of like equivalent to, you ever watch a movie and somebody's giving out a telephone number and they go, yeah, my number's 555, 32, whatever. They always use 555, and that's because that 555 prefix, nobody has 555. The phone company many years ago said, we're going to reserve 555 for something. And nobody is ever going to use it. And Hollywood doesn't like to get people in trouble. There's a famous song, 8675309. I'm sure whoever had that telephone number in the various area codes had to either give it up or didn't mind getting called a million times a day. Hey man, this is 8675309. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? That stupid song by Tommy, is it Tommy Two-Tone? Anyway, go Google it, 8675309. Now, there were the 32 bits, and the reason we call this a 32-bit address is, as I mentioned, it's literally 32 ones and zeros, okay? Now, that means that there can be 4.29 billion computers in the world on one gigantic network. Great, 4.29 billion. We're not going to exhaust that anytime soon. But where are we? Yes, we are. When Bob Kahn and Vinton Cerf invented IP version 4, and there was an IP version 1, 2, and 3, but they never got actually used. IP version 4 been around a long time, as long as I can remember, as long as, like my early 20s, my teens, I remember using, IP addresses. We ran out, or we're running out, just like we're running out of telephone numbers. This is why we have to keep coming up with new prefixes in Houston. Anybody have a 346 telephone number and wish to God they didn't? Or you have an 832 telephone number instead of a 713 or a 281 area code telephone numbers, because we keep having to add new area codes. Yeah, so that part of my business is providing telephone services to companies. And when it's a new company and they ask me for a new telephone number and they said, what do you got? And I said, well, I got 346, something. I was like, what's that bullshit? 346. Nobody's going to know we're in Houston. And I have to remind them, well, this is really an internet world anyway. But so I usually have to pay for it. People have to request and pay extra money. I bought somebody a 212 number recently because they wanted a telephone number and they wanted to appear as if they were in New York. It cost me $150 for a 212 telephone number, and that wasn't even a special one. If you want a special one, like 212-635-4000, you're going to pay like $15,000 for one of those numbers. Anyway, IP version 6 came along because we ran out of IP address spaces. And this is also assuming that the whole world is on one gigantic LAN, which we're not, but we still assume that we are. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize my there. I didn't realize my other computer was pointing at my fan. So now you got me twice anyway. We're almost done here. IP version 6 was developed, and you might say to yourself, well, where did IP version 5 go? There was no IP version 5, or it was an experimental version. In the networking world and in the computer world, many times an odd numbered major revision is skipped because it's an experimental revision. That's why there's no such thing as Windows 9. There was a Windows 7, but Microsoft decided, let's adopt that thing that everybody else is doing, and we're skipping the odd numbers because those are experimental, and we'll go to the even numbers. Like the Samsung Galaxy S, now they're on. They're going back to the old way that what Microsoft used to do it is, let's call it the year that it came out. So the Galaxy S20, that's because it's the year 2020 when it came out. So they went from 10 to 20. And we all know why they did that, don't we? Because they had to have one number higher. They had to get higher up than the Apple iPhone. What's the iPhone on now? Is it the iPhone 10? Or do we have something past the 10 now? Okay, 11. So Apple doesn't do it. Apple's iPhone 11. So Galaxy said, screw that, just go to 20. See how much better we are? We're 9 numbers better than an Apple. What does that mean, really? Nothing. It doesn't. It's just car manufacturers used to do that, like the Pontiac 6000. Why do we number it to 6,000? Because it's better than the 5,000. You know, it doesn't, they don't mean anything. Anyway, IP version 6. You will learn, and I'll teach you guys the concept of IP version 6, but we're not going to do any active exercises in calculating IP version 6 addresses, mostly because it's a much more complicated numbering scheme. It's 2 to the 128th power, meaning there can literally be, if every computer in the world and every device in the world was on the same LAN, you could have 3.4 times 10 to the 38th power different nodes on that network. We're not going to exhaust that range for a long time, not until we're spreading out across the solar system. Or we've got to have IP addresses for Mars and the moon and stuff like that. But having said that, these are much harder numbers to remember. So network managers, I'll just tell you right now, most of us network managers, we dread having to eventually give up IP version 4. Eventually IP version 4 will be end of life, just like Windows 7 was recently end of life. And we all had to, whether we wanted it or not, we had to upgrade to Windows 10. Hopefully none of you had to suffer the shitty Windows 8, by the way. It was a horrible version of Windows. Over here. So IP version 4 packet adds another 20 to 24 bytes. So transport layer adds 20 bytes. IP layer 3 adds 20 bytes. This is why your maximum message size out of your application when it hits a transport layer can only be 1460, and that's because layer 2, the data link layer, Ethernet, and we didn't get to this, and you're going to learn this when you watch the video, which I'll try to get uploaded later tonight. In the data link layer protocol known as Ethernet, the maximum frame size is 1500 bytes. Can't be bigger than 1500 bytes. So that means that if I've got a 1500 byte frame that has a IP packet inside of it, that IP packet has to be smaller than 1500 bytes. It needs to be at least 20 bytes smaller so that you can have the room for the overhead of identifying this data, whatever it is, as an IP frame. And then within that, an IP packet. And then within that IP packet, which is 1480 bytes, you need to have enough space for a TCP segment, which also has to be defined by the first 20 bytes. And there, so each segment can only be 1460 bytes. So keep that in mind. Ethernet equals 1500 byte frames, meaning the maximum size of your transport device. Let's pretend Ethernet frames are a big aircraft carrier or ferry. It goes from point A to point B across a channel. You can get no more than 1,500 cars or 1,500 people or 1,500 things on that ferry. And then within that ferry are a bunch of cars and trucks and buses and different sized devices, or excuse me, different sized automobiles. That's like at the IP layer, they can only be no bigger than 1480 because they have 20 bytes of overhead. I'm not going to write that in. And then at the transport layer, layer 4, that can only be 1460 because it also has 20 bytes of overhead. So think about the bus that drives onto the ferry. How many people are actually on that bus? Let's say the bus seats 70 people. So are there 70 people on the bus? No, there's actually 71 people on the bus because you got to have a bus driver, and the bus driver takes up a little bit of the front of the bus. So you can't use that space. So consider every time you go up in the network layer as another bus driver. And then let's say you've got 2 or 3 groups on that bus from different daycare centers or whatever. You got little kids on the bus. Each grouping of kids or each family, let's say, has one manager of that family or one supervisor of that little group of kids. So that's equivalent to the overhead of TCP. They're not a kid that needs to go somewhere, but they're a required supervisor. You can't just put a little bunch of little 7-year-olds on a bus and say, okay, you're going to the museum, have fun. You know, the teachers and the teachers' aides, and you know, they get to go too. I used to do that sometimes for my daughter's elementary school class. They'd call me up and say, hey, we need some more chaperones to take these kids to the museum so they don't get in all kinds of trouble and, you know, knock over dinosaurs and stuff. You want to come with us? We know you're not a student. You don't need to go to the museum. You've been there 100 times. Well, we need you. In other words, I'm required overhead. Keep these concepts in mind. I know they sound kind of silly, but it helps you. I hope this helps you conceptually understand why there's all these different layers and why the actual user data, the usable user data, gets smaller as you get up to your final application. Putting an envelope inside a box, inside a truck, inside an aircraft, inside an airplane to fly it somewhere. Where'd my PowerPoint go? I'm gonna stop in just a minute here. Oh, I lost my mouse. I hate that. My mouse is so little, I lost it. There it is. Found my mouse. So IP version 6, all you need to know from this is that it adds overhead and there's user data, but I'm not going to ask you to memorize the layout. I will ask you to do this. Here's what you do need to know about these different layers. Whether it's transport layer or network layer, there's almost always a source and a destination address. In a transport layer packet, you have a source port number and a destination port number. In other words, you have a from and a to address. This is an easy concept to understand in order to route traffic. In order for you to get an email from you to the person you're sending it to, you have to know their email address. And then if you want them to respond, they have to know your email address. So, and then there's a little bit of extra overhead, which is the subject. Here's the subject of this email. Okay, so think of your email address, and your email is, that's the source address. And whoever you're sending the email to, that's the destination address. In the case of TCP, the destination port numbers, like port 80, for example, that identifies that this data, whatever it is probably a web request. That source port number at this particular point, usually it's just a randomly generated number, which your computer uses so that when it gets a response back, it can tie that response back to that original request. And then at the network layer, it also has a source address and a destination address, both of which are 32 bits. That's your IP address of your computer. That's the 192.168.1. whatever you have. That destination address is the IP address, not the application layer address, but the IP address of the receiving computer. You type in www.amazon.com, for example, your application has to translate that into a real IP address, whatever it is, 65.130. whatever. That is what goes into your IP packet at layer 3. So there's a source and a destination at every layer, even down to data link and physical layer. At the application layer, if it's in the case of email, it's a from jake@uh.edu to mis4397@uh.edu. There's a transport layer, source and destination address. Destination address, if I'm sending email out, it's going to be port 25. If I'm using U of H's mail server, it's going to be the destination address at IP is going to be 129.7. Whatever mail.uh.edu translates to. The data link layer address, that's going to be the source address is my MAC address of my laptop here. And the destination address in the case of a data link layer is not the MAC address of uh.edu, it's the MAC address of my gateway, my ASUS RT68 gateway sitting in the next room. Because data link layer is only used for LANs. That's another thing, another important concept to understand is that the IP layer, the packet that I send out, the transport segment and the packet that I send out from my laptop is exactly what you receive on your laptop if I was communicating directly to you, or exactly what's received on the receiving server wherever it is in the world. It's not molested in any way. Whereas the frame that is received, the frame that my computer sent out, looks nothing like the frame that the server received because it's only used for local area physical connections. Okay, I created a frame. In other words, here's a box that I put my letter into, and that box was simply used to go from my room to the post office in my neighborhood, pretending that I'm a LAN here, or my room to the next room, and then whoever got that box rips that box up, takes the letter out, and decides, okay, what do I need to do with this? And he discards that box, doesn't use it. That's the frame. Frames are only used on LANs. Packets and segments are used on the internet, on WANs, on on connections where there's an unlimited number of pieces of hardware that it has to go through. Okay, that's an important concept to understand. I think I'm going to stop here because I believe I'm out of time. Really close to being out of time here. Let's just go. Oh, yeah. So and I'll finish up this tomorrow. I will have a class tomorrow. If you can't attend it because I had said that Fridays were optional, that's fine. I'll upload this and upload another version that I'm going to do tomorrow. And we'll start with this. You will be responsible and you need to memorize some of the more well-known, we call them well-known ports or well-known services. If you were to go Google for well-known transport or well-known port numbers, you'll hit wikis, you'll hit all kinds of documentation on and charts on what the more popular port numbers are. Let me just show you real quick because, and some of it's a little eye-opening for you, and some of it, some of it you won't know what some of these port numbers are. You're like, what are those? I don't know. But a lot of them would be like, oh yeah, I recognize that. Oh yeah, I play those games. I recognize those numbers, or I've used that Microsoft Terminal Services Protocol or IRC. Just type in well-known port numbers in Google. Scroll down to the Wikipedia here as an extensive, almost full list as far as I know of the port numbers, starting with port 0. We don't use port 0 because it's like the same reason we don't have IP addresses of 0. It tells you whether these port numbers are official or standardized or unofficial. So here's the FTP, here's email, SMTP. Here's HTTP, port 80. What port number do we use for secure web traffic? For a little further down the list here, it is port 443. In other words, we didn't start figuring out, hey, we should encrypt our data before it leaves the computer until 380 more protocols later. But you need to memorize and just be able to tell me off the top of your head. If I say, what port number does web traffic typically travel on? You'll say, that's port 80. What about encrypted
encrypted web traffic, or HTTPS. What's that? Oh, that's port 443. What's the most email transfer on? Port 25. Also maybe port 143. What is DNS and what port does it use? Oh, it uses port 53. You need to know those numbers. There's about 6 or 7 other popular important ones, but these are the ones here, for the most part, these are the ones that you guys are going to be dealing with because you're blocking them or you're filtering them. You're looking for certain types of traffic. A lot of times we have to block certain higher up port numbers to keep people from running specialized servers or playing certain games. Like Xbox, for example, they use certain port numbers. We don't want our kids in high school to be able to use the Xbox program to play games on the library computer, so we have to block those port numbers. We can't really block the application, but we can block the port number that the application uses. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for today. Let me take a look at my chat window because I don't see the chat window now. And I have another class right now, but I promise I've gotten a lot of the stuff that made this first part of the semester very rocky to get started, and I apologize for that. But that was, a combination of the COVID-19, having to do this at home, having to record everything and then upload it, make sure I didn't, I've got to now edit this video and take out that frame where you guys all saw everybody else's, even though it was 1 second. I got to go edit it because you can stop that video on that frame and go, oh, I'm going to pretend to be student so-and-so, even though, having said that, you really need more than just your student ID. You can't, I don't think, is that true, guys? You can't just call up student services and say, my student ID is this, please tell me all my grades, or stuff like that. You need to have a little bit more information. We used to use social security number for student ID, and we figured out that was bad. That was a bad idea, but we used it for a long time. Yeah, they asked for your birth date or your telephone number or something else, two-factor authentication, in other words. Or actually, that's not two-factor, that's not two-way, that's just multi-factor authentication. We used to use our social security numbers, which was bad because, of course, your social security number can be used to, start pulling out social security checks if you're retirement age. It's used for fraud all the time, and it's used to associate our credit worthiness. So U of H, about 20 years ago, when I was a student, we used socials, but about 20 years ago, we switched over to student IDs. And I've been told we're supposed to try to keep those confidential, but it's not as critical to keep those confidential, of course, as it is all of the other data. So if there's not any other questions, I'll stop the video now. I'm going to start my next class, the 4397 class. So at this point, I want you to try first the VPN, then email me your results, whether it worked or not. I want to know. And I have a feeling that most of you are probably going to email me and say you couldn't get it working. Do me that favor, and then I'll be able to figure out what the commonality is. Why was I able to get it working? Nobody else. So if you get the VPN working, then you can go directly to eilab.bauer.uh.edu. Excuse me, Zen. You have to put the word Zen on there, and this is in the notes. This is in how to set up your eilab. Go to that website. That's where you were seeing that login page. But if the VPN's not on, you just get that. You get that error. If you want to try it without VPN and use the network address translation version, go to 192.138.194.45:9080 and try that method. Again, do not click that install button. Go manually download the Citrix version 4.11. In fact, I'm going to skip that. I'm going to see if it works now. I know I tried it early and it didn't work, but it might work now. So everybody try it, email me, let me know how far you were able to get. If you are successful, In other words, if you click that and it fires up a virtual window for you, a student machine for you, go install Chrome, go install Wireshark so that we can start actually doing something with it. Don't use Internet Explorer. Don't use Edge. Okay, go try to use the, go download Chrome, sign in with your Gmail account, and then install the Chrome Remote Desktop so that you can start putting stuff on it, okay? Hopefully some of you will be successful. Like I said, if you're not, just let me know. Hey, I tried both ways. And then over the weekend, for everybody that was not successful, what I will do is I'll assign a machine for you, and I will most likely install TeamViewer. That's the one that I'm very familiar with. And then I will simply email you and say, okay, TeamViewer, you install TeamViewer on your machine. Here's your remote assistance number. It'll be a 12-digit number that you type in, and you'll have a password. I'll give you the password, and then you can remotely log into that machine using TeamViewer, and you don't have to go through all the procedure of getting a VPN working and or getting the network address translation working. But try those first two methods first. You guys are my guinea pigs this semester. See if that will work. If there's not any other questions, I will see you guys on tomorrow. Can you guys make it to class tomorrow? You guys not doing anything tomorrow at 2? Okay, good. I'll see most of you tomorrow at 2 p.m. All right, go Cougs.